Today, you don't need it.
This is your last plate.
And you look like you need it more than I do.
Thank you for seeing me.
Eat.
By the time the spoon scraped the bottom of the pot, Amina already knew what she was about to do. She just didn't know why her hands were shaking. The afternoon heat lay heavy on the harbor, thick enough to slow people down and strip conversations to their bare minimum. Boats knocked softly against one another, tired from carrying the same stories every day. Amina's stall stood where it always had, stitched together with old zinc sheets, patience, and a faith she rarely spoke about out loud. Business had been slow, too slow. The pot in front of her held only one serving of rice now, clinging stubbornly to the edges as if refusing to accept its fate. She was about to cover it when she noticed him. He wasn't asking. That was the first thing that stood out. He stood a few steps away, not close enough to intrude, not far enough to pretend he wasn't there. Dust coated his shoes, and the small backpack by his feet looked more like an apology than luggage. His shoulders were slightly hunched, as though life had taught him to make himself smaller. Amina felt that familiar tightening in her chest, the one that usually arrived before trouble or truth. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asked, voice calm. "Or are you hoping the smell will do the work?" He flinched, then smiled faintly. "Just passing through," he said. "I don't have enough." She glanced at the pot, then at him, then back again. Some moments she had learned were questions life asked without words. She picked up the spoon. "Hello guys. Welcome to my channel where interesting stories of love, communication, and empathy are told. If you're enjoying this already, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, share with your friends, and tell me your thoughts in the comments section below." "Hunger doesn't wait for money, my friend," Amina said, setting the plate down gently. "Sit." His pride rose quickly, like it had been waiting its turn. "I can't take your last plate," he said. "You'll need it." She smiled, the kind of smile that carried memory and mischief, the one Aunt Mabel used to wear whenever she ignored good advice. "If I eat it alone, it will still finish. If you eat it, at least it finishes well." He hesitated, then sat. He ate slowly, as if the food needed to earn his trust. When he was done, he stood and reached into his pocket, producing a few crumpled notes, carefully flattened as though dignity could be pressed back into them. She pushed his hand away. "Tomorrow," she said simply. "When tomorrow comes." He looked at her then, properly this time. Something unspoken passed between them, gratitude tangled with disbelief. "Thank you," he said quietly, and walked away without asking her name. That evening, Amina closed her stall earlier than usual. Her pot was empty, her earnings thin, but her steps felt steady as she walked home. In her small room, she laughed softly while changing clothes. "You really don't learn," she told herself. It reminded her of Aunt Mabel giving away her last loaf during a blackout and saying, "Darkness is lighter when people eat together." Amina smiled and slept deeply. The next afternoon, the man returned. He looked different, cleaner, calmer, like someone who had rested without fear. This time, he paid before sitting, placing the money neatly on the counter as if correcting yesterday without erasing it. "My name is David," he said. "Amina," she replied. They talked while the harbor listened. About waves and how they sounded different when you were sad. About old Swahili proverbs and grandparents who believed silence could teach more than words. David spoke carefully, choosing sentences the way some people chose clothes. Amina listened, teasing him lightly when he grew too serious. By the third day, Mama and Jerry noticed. "That one looks at you like you're more than just a cook," she said, rearranging vegetables that didn't need rearranging. Amina laughed. "Mama, please. I sell rice, not destiny." But something had shifted. Customers lingered. Conversations stretched. The stall felt warmer. David came every afternoon, never overstaying, never demanding space. He watched her work as if it mattered. Sometimes silence settled between them, gentle and unafraid. It was okay to feel this, Amina told herself. Curiosity wasn't a promise. One evening, as the sun dipped low, David paused before leaving. "Some people give without knowing who they're giving to," he said softly. That kind of kindness stays. She shrugged. Some people need without knowing how to ask. He smiled and disappeared into the crowd. Amina watched him go, unaware that the harbor had already begun whispering his name, and that the single plate of rice she gave away had set something far larger in motion. By the end of the first week, Amina realized the harbor had started keeping time by David's footsteps. She noticed it one afternoon when the air grew quieter around her stall, the way it often did just before evening prayers. The sun leaned low, painting the water copper, and without thinking, she glanced toward the narrow path between the boats. Seconds later, David appeared, as if summoned by habit rather than chance. "You're early today," she said, surprised by how naturally the words came. He smiled. "I didn't want to miss the calm." That was how it began, small sentences that carried more meaning than they should have. David became a daily presence, but never an obvious one. He didn't announce himself or demand attention. He simply arrived, paid, sat, and waited. And yet, when he wasn't there, Amina felt the absence the way one notices when a familiar sound suddenly stops. It unsettled her. They talked more now and deeper. Not the kind of deep that rushed into secrets, but the slow kind that came from comfort. David spoke about traveling and how cities looked different when you weren't searching for anything. He spoke about silence, how some silences healed, while others suffocated. Amina listened, stirring rice, nodding, sometimes challenging him. "You talk like someone who's tired of being listened to," she said once. He laughed softly. "And you cook like someone who knows hunger personally." That earned him a mock glare. "Careful. I might start charging emotional tax." Their humor slipped in easily, light and familiar. It reminded Amina of evenings long ago, when her parents were still alive and laughter didn't feel like something you had to earn back. The harbor noticed too. Dockworkers began timing their breaks around David's arrival, drawn by conversation as much as food. Even Mama and Jerry leaned closer than necessary whenever he spoke, pretending to rearrange onions while clearly listening. "That one," Mama and Jerry whispered one day. "He watches you like he's afraid you might disappear." Amina laughed it off, but later, as she wiped down her counter, the words returned to her. She caught David watching her hands as she worked, his gaze focused, respectful, almost protective. It made her heart trip, then steady itself again. It was okay to feel this, she reminded herself. Feelings didn't always demand action. One afternoon, a small incident shifted everything. A young boy ran past the stall, knocking over a crate of tomatoes. Chaos followed, shouting, scrambling, accusations flying. Before Amina could move, David stood up, calmly helping the boy gather the fallen produce. He spoke gently, defusing tension with patience instead of authority. "Accidents don't mean bad intentions," he said to the angry vendor. "They mean someone needs a moment." The crowd softened. The boy's eyes filled with relief. Amina watched from behind her stall, something warm blooming in her chest. She realized then that David didn't just talk about empathy. He practiced it quietly, without applause. Later, as they sat together, she teased him. "You should be careful. People will start expecting wisdom from you." He smiled. "Only if they're willing to hear it." Days passed. Her stall grew busier than ever. People stayed longer, drawn by the feeling rather than the food. Amina worked harder but felt lighter, energized by conversations that spilled past plates and into stories. Sometimes David fell silent, staring at the water with a distant look. When she asked, he brushed it off gently. Just thinking. She didn't push. Trust, she had learned, was built by allowing space. One evening, rain surprised the harbor, sudden and heavy. People scattered, shouting and laughing as they ran for cover. David stayed, helping Amina secure the tarp. Their hands brushed briefly. Not dramatic, not deliberate, but the moment stretched longer than it should have. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed. Amina pulled her hand away first, clearing her throat. "Rain likes to remind us who's in charge." David smiled. "It does that well." As the rain eased, silence settled between them. Not awkward, but charged. Amina felt it, that quiet pull again, stronger now. She wondered briefly who he really was. The thought made her uneasy, and she pushed it aside. That night, she counted her earnings twice. Business was good. Too good. Change hovered at the edges of her life, uninvited. The next day, David arrived late. "You disappeared yesterday," she said lightly. "I had responsibilities," he replied, the words sounding heavier than before. Something in his tone made her pause. "We all do," she said gently. "Just don't forget yourself while carrying them." He looked at her like the words had landed somewhere deep. "I'll try." That evening, sleek black cars drove past the market road again. Slow, deliberate, out of place. Heads turned. Whispers followed. Amina felt a strange unease settle in her chest. David did not come the next day, and for the first time since he arrived, the harbor felt like it was holding a secret too large to keep quiet. The harbor woke up restless that morning, like it had overheard something it wasn't supposed to hear. Amina sensed it even before she reached her stall. The air felt tighter, conversations sharper, eyes quicker to turn. She brushed it off at first. Harbors were like that, always dramatic, always exaggerating their own importance. She tied her apron, lit her stove, and focused on the familiar comfort of routine. But by midday, David still hadn't appeared. She told herself not to notice. People were allowed to be absent. He had said he had responsibilities. Everyone did. Still, each time footsteps approached, her chest lifted slightly, then settled back into disappointment. Mama and Jerry leaned over from her stall, lowering her voice. "Your quiet friend hasn't come today?" "He's busy," Amina replied, sharper than she intended. Mama and Jerry studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Busy people often forget where they were happy." The words stung more than Amina expected. The afternoon crowd thinned, replaced by an unusual tension humming through the market. Then the sound came, engines. Smooth, controlled, expensive. Heads turned as sleek black cars rolled in, tires barely stirring dust. They parked near the harbor offices, glossy and out of place among rusted boats and wooden stalls. Men in dark suits stepped out, scanning the area with practiced precision. Phones came up. Whispers spread like fire chasing dry grass. "Who are they? Government?" "No. That logo." Amina's hands slowed. Her heartbeat didn't. Then she saw him. David stepped out of the central car. No backpack, no dust, no hesitation. A tailored suit hugged him like it had always belonged there. His posture was different, not arrogant, but assured. Cameras flashed. A name rippled through the crowd, spoken first in awe, then disbelief. David Mwangi and George. The world tilted. Amina felt the spoon slip from her fingers, clattering loudly against the pot. Her ears rang as fragments of conversation collided inside her head. Billionaire, chairman, harbor development, half the land. She watched him walk past stalls he now owned, past boats his company insured, past people whose lives shifted with his signatures. He did not look toward her stall. That hurt most of all. Heat rushed to her face, followed by something colder, humiliation. Every shared laugh replayed itself under a new light. Every pause, every careful answer. Had it all been an experiment? A disguise worn for entertainment? Her chest tightened. She covered her pot and shut down early, ignoring curious stares. Mama and Jerry called after her, but Amina didn't stop. She walked home faster than usual, as though distance could protect her from truth. Inside her room, the silence was loud. She sat on the edge of the bed, apron still tied, staring at the wall. Anger rose first, sharp, demanding. Then sadness followed, heavier and harder to breathe through. She had never asked him for anything. Not money, not favors, just honesty. That night, sleep refused to stay. Every sound outside felt amplified. Near midnight, a soft knock broke through her thoughts. She froze, heart pounding, then opened the door cautiously. No one stood there, only an envelope on the floor. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No logo, no signature flerist. I didn't lie to you. I just wanted one person to see me as a man, not a name. Her hands trembled as she read it again and again. The words were careful, almost tender, but they didn't erase the sting. She folded the paper once, then unfolded it, unsure whether to keep it or tear it apart. Morning came without relief. Amina returned to the harbor with resolve carved into her steps. She opened her stall, cooked, served, smiled when necessary. If David wanted forgiveness, he would have to earn it without hiding. He arrived late morning. No cars, no sweets, no guards, just David. He stopped a few steps from her stall, uncertainty written plainly across his face. The crowd barely noticed him now. Power without display looked almost ordinary. "Amina," he said softly. She didn't answer. He swallowed, then did something no one expected. He knelt beside her stall, right there on the dusty ground. Conversations froze. Mama and Jerry's basket slipped from her hands. "When you fed me," David said, voice steady but raw, "I tasted kindness I hadn't felt in years. I was tired of being rich and empty. I didn't come to deceive you. I came to breathe." Silence pressed in. Amina looked down at him, the man who had hidden his name but not his hunger. Tears blurred her vision, surprising her with their speed. She reached for a plate, her hands shaking, and placed it on the counter. "Then eat," she said quietly. But this time, no secrets. David nodded, eyes shining. The harbor exhaled. And in that moment, between dust and dignity, the balance of power shifted, not through money, but through truth finally spoken aloud. David remained on his knees for a moment longer than anyone expected. Dust clung to the fabric of his trousers, but he made no effort to brush it away. Around them, the harbor slowed, as if time itself had decided to watch. Even Mama and Jerry, who never missed a chance to comment on anything, stood quietly now, lips pressed together, eyes sharp with emotion. Amina turned back to her stove, lifting the lid from the pot. Steam rose, familiar and grounding, wrapping around her face like reassurance. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory taking over where her heart still hesitated. She served the food the same way she always did, carefully, deliberately. But inside, everything felt fragile, like a bridge being tested after a long storm. David ate without speaking. No explanations, no speeches, just food and patience. When he finished, he stood and pulled a small stool closer, stopping short, waiting. "If you'll allow me," he said quietly, "I'd like to explain, not to defend myself, just to be honest." Amina met his eyes. She saw no arrogance there now, only fatigue and something close to fear. She nodded once. "Talk." The harbor did what it always did, pretended not to listen while listening with its whole body. David spoke slowly, choosing his words as though they carried weight. He talked about inheritance that arrived before wisdom, about boardrooms colder than any night by the sea, about people who laughed too quickly and listened too little. He spoke of being surrounded and still alone, of never knowing whether kindness was real or purchased. "I wore the disguise because I was tired," he said. "Tired of being announced before I arrived. Tired of being managed instead of known." Amina folded her arms, then unfolded them again. "And I?" she asked softly. "What was I to you?" He didn't hesitate. "You were real. You still are." The simplicity of the answer unsettled her more than 1,000 excuses could have. Days followed, careful and unhurried. David returned every afternoon, always without display, always respectful. He never assumed forgiveness. He earned presence instead. He answered every question Amina asked, where he lived, how much he owned, why he had chosen silence instead of truth. Sometimes his answers were uncomfortable. Sometimes hers were too. Trust did not return suddenly. Crept back, slow and cautious, like an animal relearning safety. Mama and Jerry, of course, had opinions. "So now we are feeding billionaires on plastic chairs," she muttered one afternoon, though her eyes softened when David helped her lift a heavy crate without being asked. "Life is funny." Amina surprised herself by laughing. One evening, David stayed after closing, helping her stack stools. The sky was deep blue, the water calm. I don't expect you to forget, he said quietly. I just hope one day you won't regret giving me another chance. She paused, considering. Forgiveness doesn't erase memory, she said. It teaches it how to breathe. He nodded, absorbing the words like a lesson he intended to keep. A few days later, he invited her to see his world, not as a spectacle but as a confession. The offices overlooked the same harbor she worked beside, but from a height that made everything look distant. Glass walls, quiet hallways, art chosen by consultants. He showed her meeting rooms where decisions were made without faces attached. Then he led her into his private office. On the wall hung a single framed photograph. Her stall, the moment she handed him the plate of rice. I keep it there, he said almost shyly, to remember who I want to be when things get loud. Amina stepped closer, touching the frame lightly. Her chest loosened. Power, she realized, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the courage to be small again. As they left, she noticed how staff greeted him. Respectful, yes, but distant. She understood then what hunger he had truly carried. Back at the harbor, something shifted. David did not change the market. He listened to it. He sat with vendors, asked questions, took notes no one asked him to take. When discussions about development surfaced, he insisted vendors be present. When profit margins were mentioned, he asked about people first. One afternoon, a company representative tried to speak over Amina. David stopped him with a raised hand. This is her space, he said calmly. We listen here. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. That was the moment Amina felt it. Not romance, not yet, but respect solidifying into something unmovable. Later that evening, as they closed the stall together, Amina spoke without looking at him. You know, she said, I don't need saving. I know, David replied immediately. That's why I stayed. She smiled to herself. The harbor lights flickered on, reflecting across the water like scattered promises. Somewhere between shared silence and hard-earned honesty, something new was being built. Not on wealth, but on humility. And this time, the foundation felt strong enough to last. Change arrived quietly, the way morning light does. No announcement, just a steady presence that made everything clearer. Amina noticed it first in the rhythm of the harbor. Conversations softened. Arguments ended sooner. People who once ate quickly and left now lingered, resting elbows on the same plastic tables, sharing stories between mouthfuls of rice. Her stall had become a meeting point not by design, but by trust. David never took the seat of honor. He queued like everyone else, greeted dockworkers by name, listened more than he spoke. When people thanked him too loudly, he deflected gently. This place existed before me, he'd say. I'm only learning from it. One afternoon, Amina finally asked the question she'd been carrying. Doesn't it bother you? She said while stirring the pot. To step back like this? David thought for a moment. It bothers me less than pretending, he replied. And it feels lighter. She nodded. It was okay to choose lightness, she realized. Even after carrying heavy things for a long time. The real test came without drama. Representatives from David's company arrived one morning with folders and confident smiles. They spoke of expansion, of efficiency, of numbers that sounded impressive but felt hollow. Vendors gathered, uneasy. Amina felt her chest tighten, old fears knocking. David listened, hands folded. When they finished, he stood. We won't move forward without them, he said, gesturing toward the vendors. No plans about this harbor will be made without the people who live in it. Silence followed, then murmurs, then relief. Mama in Jerry cleared her throat loudly. So we are part of the future now? She asked. David smiled. You always were. From that day, the changes came differently. Benches replaced broken crates. Clean water points appeared. Shade where there had only been sun. Ownership shared, not taken. Amina's stall expanded, not into something shiny and unfamiliar, but into something sturdier, welcoming more hands and stories. One evening, after closing, David invited Amina to his home by the water. Not the one featured in magazines, but a smaller place filled with art and silence and too much unused space. He cooked for her, burning the first pot of rice and laughing like a man relieved to fail at something ordinary. You see, Amina teased. Even billionaires need supervision. He raised his hands. I surrender. They ate, talked, laughed. About loneliness. About forgiveness. About how success without connection felt like shouting into an empty hall. Amina spoke of fear too, fear of losing herself, of being seen as an accessory instead of a person. David listened, steady as ever. Weeks later, the harbor hosted a small celebration. No speeches, just food, music, and shared tables. Executives sat beside fishermen. Children ran between chairs. Mama and Jerry danced, loudly and unapologetically, insisting everyone remember when Aunt Mabel once tried to bake cookies at midnight and blamed the moon for burning them. Amina watched it all from behind her stall, heart full. David joined her, holding 2 plates. You were right, he said softly. I didn't need a new world, just a place where people eat together. She smiled, taking 1 plate. And tell the truth while they're at it. They clinked spoons gently. As the sun dipped and the harbor lights flickered on, Amina understood the comeback had never been about wealth or recognition. It was about dignity returning to where it belonged. And this time it stayed. Kindness often begins quietly, with no witnesses and no guarantees. Amina gave without knowing the outcome, and David learned that humility could open doors money never could. When people choose honesty over appearances and empathy over power, communities heal in small, lasting ways. Sometimes love looks like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like shared tables. And sometimes, it's simply the courage to see a person before their name. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, and comment the lesson you're taking home today. Your voice truly matters here.